Hello, I'm Mariam Mashiri, and this is the Iran War Today, bringing you up to date with all you need to know as the US and Iran continue to exchange strikes. Well, let's start with some of today's key developments. Donald Trump warned the US would strike again, and he did. Explosions were heard across Iran's southern coast for a second straight night near the Strait of Hormuz. The US says it hit 90 military targets. The Iranian Health Ministry says 14 people have been killed in the last 48 hours. This afternoon, there were reports of more explosions in Iran, with state media reporting that the Bushehr nuclear plant was targeted by the US. The report suggests the perimeter of the power plant was hit. The US has not commented on these latest strikes. Air raid sirens rang out across the Gulf overnight as Iran fired back, launching missiles and drones at American assets in the Gulf. In a repeat of the night before, US bases in Kuwait and Bahrain were targeted, as well as Qatar. And Tehran launched another wave of strikes on Thursday afternoon, targeting US-linked bases in Jordan, Kuwait and Iraq. The US says there's been no major damage to any of their sites in the Gulf. Meanwhile, large crowds have lined the streets in the city of Mashhad for the burial of Iran's late Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. It's the culmination of a week of funeral processions and rallies. Well, yesterday, Donald Trump said that as far as he was concerned, the ceasefire is over. And today, that seems to be the case, with both sides launching more strikes. But en route back to the US after the NATO summit, the US president claimed that Iran still wants to talk.
And they want to make a deal so badly. They called a little while ago. They want to make a deal so badly. I just don't know if they're worthy of making a deal. I don't know that they're going to honor the deal.
Well, let's speak to our correspondent in Washington, Nick Johnson. Nick, what's the latest from the US? Are they hinting at continued strikes, or are they returning to talks?
Well, it's not immediately clear. We heard from US Central Command on the conclusion of those strikes last night. They confirmed that 90 Iranian targets have been struck. But since then, we've had the continuation of those strikes. We've seen railway bridges in Iran hit, and we've also heard from Iranian state media who claim that there have been US strikes in the vicinity of the Bushehr nuclear power plant. Now, we haven't yet heard from Donald Trump or indeed from US Central Command commenting on those latest round of strikes. But, you know, looking back to what Donald Trump said yesterday at the conclusion of that NATO summit, the rhetoric, he talked about the ceasefire being over, but then he was asked again by a reporter if it meant the war was going to restart, and he said, no, I don't think it means it's going to restart, and anything that does happen will happen very quickly. So it remains to be seen whether there will be any continuation of those strikes a little later this evening. But it's worth just having a look at the political backdrop here in Washington against which these strikes are taking place. In the Republican-controlled Senate last month, a measure was passed whereby the president needs to seek congressional approval before the continuation of the war. Now, that's was largely a symbolic vote, but it just shows you the level of dissatisfaction even among his own party at any continuation of these hostilities. I just want to bring you as well a comment from a Democratic Senator, Tim Kaine for Virginia. He said the US should not be launching new strikes without congressional approval and restarting a war that has raised gas prices, killed Americans and hurt the economy. Now, again, Donald Trump said yesterday, he talked about how oil and gas prices had fallen since the signing of that memorandum of understanding last month. But actually, over the last 48 hours or so, as a result of these strikes resuming, oil and gas is back up again. Now, we don't yet know what the future of those prices are. It will depend on whether Donald Trump is prepared to take further action against Iran.
Nick, thank you. So what about Iran? Well, the Revolutionary Guard Corps has warned the US that none of its regional bases are safe from being attacked, threatening further strikes in the coming days if the US chooses to strike again. The latest return to conflict with the US comes as the country is in the midst of mourning, finally holding a funeral for the former Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. He was killed in the first 24 hours of the US-Israeli war with Iran in February. But his funeral has been delayed for months because of the ongoing fighting, making such a huge gathering unsafe. Thousands line the streets of Mashhad, Iran's holiest city. Well, since the start of the war, it's been difficult to hear from people inside Iran about how they are feeling. But BBC Arabic's Middle East Daily has managed to speak with several Iranian citizens following the renewed bombing of their country. Have a listen.
If war breaks out again, God forbid, what will be targeted this time? People are exhausted by this situation. One day there's a ceasefire, and the next it's violated.
The USA has once again shown its willingness to violate the ceasefire. America and Israel are nothing more than paper tigers. My greatest regret, and what saddens me most, is that we once considered the Gulf states our friends and brothers, but now they see us as enemies.
It's not the first time we've had explosions in the south of Iran. People are truly exhausted by this situation, and no one knows how long this uncertainty will last. We have been living under constant tension and apprehension for nearly 5 months.
Well, with me here is Bahrain Abbasi from the BBC's Persian service. Bahrain, how is the latest renewed fighting being viewed by those inside Iran and indeed by the regime?
The authorities are portraying the news strikes as another example that the US cannot be trusted. They say that it is a violation of the memorandum of understanding between the two countries, and they are saying that they're accusing the US of committing war crimes by attacking civilian infrastructure, including 2 railway lines. One of them connected the capital to the city of Mashhad, where the funeral processions are underway for Iran's former supreme leader, and they're saying that the US is trying to undermine those ceremonies. So they are saying that the memorandum of understanding gave them the right to control the Strait of Hormuz, and that they're not willing to give that up because they believe that they can use it as leverage in future negotiations. So although they are suffering under the US strikes, both in terms of economy and also infrastructure, but they believe that they have a higher tolerance for pain compared to their adversaries.
And what about this alleged strike near a nuclear plant? What more do we know about that?
So the Iranian media are saying that the perimeter of the nuclear power plant, the Bushehr nuclear power plant, was struck. It's the only operating civilian nuclear power plant in Iran, and we have had explosions in the province, but we have no reports that the reactor itself was struck. And the US has not confirmed whether it was the target of the attack. They say that the targets, they hit 90 targets, including air defense systems or like drone storage facilities. But in terms of the power plant, we haven't had any indications that there have been a nuclear incident or radioactive release.
Let's talk a little bit about the funeral procession for the late Supreme Leader. That's been happening whilst all of this renewed fighting has been going on.
Exactly. The timing is significant. All the fighting is happening as the Supreme Leader is going to be buried in Iran's holiest place, the shrine of the Shia Muslims' third Imam. And it's the culmination of a week of mourning ceremonies that took the remains of the Supreme Leader throughout Iran to different cities and also Iraq, cities that had political or religious significance. And the Iranian authorities have been trying to project unity and strength through showcasing these events following surviving the war with Israel and the US, and also 6 months after thousands of people, thousands of protesters were killed on the streets. And but for the ordinary Iranians, the huge crowds that you see in Iran, it's not surprising. It's estimated that the government still has between 10 to 20% of support amongst the Iranian population, and they have been providing all the resources, including food and transportation, for them to show up at this event. But the majority of the Iranians seems to be spectators rather than participants at the moment.
Okay, Bahrain, thank you very much. Well, the world is watching closely to see what happens next, particularly when it comes to the impact on oil and supply chains. Just 2 days of strikes have already had an impact. So with more on that, let's speak to our North America business correspondent, Michelle Fleury. Michelle, oil prices jumped yesterday. What's the story today?
Yeah, I mean, it's another roller coaster day, Miriam. Oil prices are settling down, at least for now. Traders are sort of holding their breath. They're kind of betting that this won't lead back to a sort of full-blown war, but they're still waiting to see what comes next. And so you've got Brent crude pulling back. As you mentioned, it spiked yesterday above $80 a barrel on Wednesday. Now, I guess everyone's just waiting to see where prices are going to go next. But, you know, just before we went on air, I was looking at Brent. It was around $76 a barrel. Bear in mind that when this conflict started, oil was sitting around $72 a barrel.
And the markets, what are they doing?
Yeah, for the most part, stocks also are sort of shaking off the latest US-Iran tensions. They've actually moved higher. The S&P 500 edged up, the Dow slipped but now is back in positive territory. The Nasdaq has also gained ground. I think the big comeback story today has been chip stocks. When we saw this escalation in tensions prior to that, there had been kind of an aversion to chips, but now money seems to be pouring back into that. And so as a result, we're seeing the latest kind of buy back, if you like, as sort of investors return to semiconductor chips was Micron. Its share price up around 7%.
OK, Michelle, good to talk to you. So will this be another quick series of tit-for-tat strikes that will settle down and allow talks to resume? Or could this be the end of the ceasefire and a return to all-out war? Well, with me now is our Chief International Correspondent, Lise Doucet. So, Lise, where do you see things going on from here?
So when is a ceasefire not a ceasefire? I think as always in these conflicts, we're getting a new lexicon. President Trump has said recently that a ceasefire in the Middle East is not the same as anywhere else in the world. He said it just means more, in his words, more moderate firing. And I think this is the new reality, most of all for Iranians and the region, that it's not going to be all-out war, nor will it be a permanent peace. You're going to continue to have these occasional escalations. And for now, this latest one over 2 nights seems to have subsided. You have President Trump using a phrase that he's used many times before. I think they want to talk. They're desperate for talks. I've spoken to the leaders, which is a way of saying that the mediators are in trying, doing what they can, stepping up their efforts to cool the tensions, to get both sides back to the negotiating table. So they will continue to talk, but they will continue to fight. This is what we've seen time and again, Miriam, in this recent period. The Gaza ceasefire, President Trump announces with great fanfare last October the greatest peace in the region in 3,000 years. He did achieve the breakthrough in a ceasefire, the first phase of a ceasefire. Since then, for the people of Gaza, there hasn't been a ceasefire. They've not moved for the second phase. Same with the so-called ceasefire in Lebanon. And to now, here we are, the Iran-US so-called ceasefire. It underlines again, there's absolutely no chance they're going to be able to settle the major issues. A permanent system to regulate the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is making it absolutely clear it will continue to hold sway in some way. And then, of course, the biggest issue of all, Iran's nuclear program. So I'm afraid, Miriam, that this is going to be the story for some time to come.
It almost feels like you're saying there's no peace, but there's no war. There's something in between that we have to start getting used to.
Yes, yes. Well, who can get used to that? I think the markets seem to be getting used to it. The oil prices, of course, went up again and then settled back down. I think the markets, including oil prices, seem to have realized that this is what it's going to be like. But if there isn't a huge volume of traffic through this crucial waterway, the kind of hunger crisis in the more vulnerable countries around the world is not going to be resolved. The pain is still going to cut deep. And most of all for Iranians who are now asking, especially those who are not part of these mourning ceremonies, are asking what kind of a leadership is going to emerge now in this new era.
What were they saying to you when you were there?
Well, we were mainly focused on the funeral, but even in the funeral, even in that throng of mourners completely dressed in black, waving the red flag symbolizing blood and revenge, there were Iranians who pulled us aside and said, these are not the real voices of the revolution. The real voices were on these streets 6 months ago in the protests, which were put down with lethal force, killing many thousands. Some Iranians said, we're here because our companies told us we had to be here. But equally, there's no denying that these leaders have survived the war. They've now been emboldened, and that they have shown during these 6 days of public mourning in Iran and neighboring Iraq that their core support is still solid. They still have the ability to bring large crowds onto the streets.
Okay, Lise, thank you very much. Well, whether you're joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, radio or TV, thank you for your time. You're now up to date with the Iran War Today.